Oh my gosh, that's awesome, Ashley.
Sonia, I'm going to try and be at the chamber meeting. It all depends on if I can get a ride.
Okay.
So, because we have the kids that day,
Right.
and that means I has to, unless Matthew, I'm going to try and work it out. Thank you.
Let me know. I mean, depending on who's setting up, I still have to figure that out too.
Are you going to have it for sure here?
Yeah.
How do you want it set up? We talked about this yesterday. Do you want it set up like this?
Well, it depends on how many people are.
They can add more tables. Or do you want just chairs and
Chairs.
tables spacing shown?
Yeah, just so people are distant.
Okay.
Probably. Unless it's just chairs. I mean,
That's what I was
unless
wondering, you probably could just do chairs because people want to do, what, then you have lunch, don't you?
we're not serving lunch.
Okay. then
Unless
we could
they
just
bring-
do chairs.
Unless they bring their own, we aren't providing anything. We don't want that challenge.
Then I think we'll just do chairs. I'll have you guys just do chairs.
Standards.
They bring lunch.
Double standards, not just.
I'm just, trying to make it simple.
Yep, that's a good idea.
That's kind of my philosophy, keep it simple.
Mhm.
Okay, well, we'll call the meeting to order Tuesday.
1 second, please.
Sure.
Tuesday, June 16th, 2020 meeting.
We'll call our meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Deb Belton,
Shannon Sweeney. Patrick Conrad.
Tom Marsville.
Everyone,
Second Sonia Torba.
Do I hear a motion to approve our agenda for today?
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve our minutes for today?
So
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, treasurer's report.
do you want to just,
Good. Let me make sure I have it right.
we just had the accounts payable and you're going to have to make a motion for approving those. Everybody signed and there was 2 payments on here.
Yeah, well, that's what this is here.
Credit card charges for meeting supplies and then our membership to the Wright County Economic Development Partnership. So we'll need a motion.
make a motion to approve the treasurer's report as dispensed.
Second? All in favor?
aye.
Motion passed.
And then I just put in there the fund for that second one, for our balances at. If you look towards the bottom of the page, it says EDA cash. It hasn't changed much. Okay.
That's good. That's good. All right. Old business, we talked about the EDA information brochure and changes to the city website. And with the COVID scenario, that's pretty much been dragged to a halt. So we need to kind of reactivate that, find out if we can find somebody. I mean, I can make a brochure, but, like we have business listing of available properties. I literally would have to go around and take pictures of all the for sale signs, property for sale signs, and then call the realtors for all of the data on that piece of property. And I'd be willing to do that when I get back from my Seattle trip. So I don't know any other way to do it. We don't have anything on record of things that are available.
No, and I was actually going to ask you, Shannon, do you think that if we would still put something together to try and get an intern, because we were talking this morning that we really need to revamp our whole website. Do you think if I would get that out to colleges, that even in the fall time of year, that if a kid is going to college and they really in the area, that they would maybe do something like that if we offered them a decent wage?
Yeah, that experience. I don't have much experience myself in that area, but yeah, it's possible.
Because I thought we would still try. Because I know in Winston, we had an intern that worked while she was going to school, exactly the exact same thing, so.
And you make, as a urban studies program
Yeah.
still. There's a pretty active program through Hamlin now for public administration.
Oh, okay.
I believe St. Cloud even used to have some economic development stuff, so they may still.
When I was thinking, some kids that go to St. Cloud live in Montrose, they drive every day, so.
The partnership used an intern on St. Cloud.
Okay.
Did a pretty good job. So I would try it. I'm not sure who the contact was, or we're not listening.
Okay. When I know one of the,
Melissa right now.
She wasn't there for it, but
Oh, okay.
I can always
I can always contact Dale Rubin
Yeah.
too, that does our conferences
Oh.
through St. Cloud State, she can probably direct me. Okay. So
Yeah, 'cause,
I'm,
with this whole slowdown all summer, nothing has moved at all. And really trying to contact people to get something like this going is really a waste of energy, at this point in time. So hopefully we get things rolling.
this is what I'll do. I'm gonna put together like a job description, and I'll put it together and add, and then I think, I have on here that our next meeting is in July, but I think we're gonna cancel that meeting, and then I'll bring it to you guys in August. I'll get it to you before the meeting. You can look it over, write right on it, make any changes, and then we'll approve it in the August meeting, and then I'll get it out to schools, get it out in the paper and on the league website.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, depending on how quick everything recovers in the economy too, you might get somebody who's just, out of work or,
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
part-time who's done IT stuff, just goes, well, I could use a little $15 an hour job for a few weeks.
Yeah.
If you, I know that the Economic Development Association of Minnesota, which is a statewide organization for economic development, does do grants for internships as well.
Oh, thank you.
So, you may or may not have to be a member, but you could sure check and see. I think they do like $500 or something like that.
Okay,
And,
Everything helps.
great, thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, I built my wife's website, but it's not anywhere near as complex as what the city requires. It was a canned package, and all I had to do was move things around and all that stuff, so it wasn't too difficult. But tackling something like this, I don't have the wherewithal to do that.
Well, we just talked this morning, I get phone calls all the time from people that say, well, I'm trying to find your ordinances, and it's just so difficult to maneuver around. I said to Jess this morning, they're actually located in a dumb place because it's really hard to find them, so.
I know, if a council member can't find it,
I know.
we have a problem. Yeah, I had to learn how to maneuver through the website.
Yeah, I'll check into that, that's a good idea.
Okay, do you have any other discussion on old business? I do have one question. Other than talking about available properties, we still need a connection to the chamber for businesses looking at locating into city of Montrose. And I don't know, I mean, we have the application, but do we have anything? I've never seen anything for the chamber, like a brochure or anything.
There is a brochure.
There is?
Mhm.
Okay.
I can send it to you if you will see it.
Yeah.
I think I've sent it to you before, but maybe it's been a while.
You may have sent it to me too, like 70, so give me a break.
I'm 58, and I'm not recalling it.
I will do that right away.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, any other discussion on old business? Okay, we'll move on. New business. Fortunately, we had Mr. Shannon Sweeney here today from David Drawn Associates to inform us and educate us on TIF and tax abatement. I've read a lot about it, and I think it seems the more I read, the more confused I get. So hopefully he can do the TIF and tax abatement for dummies for us all here. So you probably know all about this, Patrick, but
I can use a refresher.
okay.
Yeah, I can't believe somebody invited me to come to a meeting to talk about taxes.
What were you thinking?
Yeah, I hope you brought a pillow. I'll just dive in. I'm Shannon Sweeney. I've worked in public finance for about 20 years now, helping cities and counties and townships finance projects and use subsidies on occasion when they decided it was appropriate. So we're going to focus our conversation on two economic development tools that are authorized under Minnesota statute: tax increment financing, or TIF, and tax abatement. And we'll see some similarities and differences between the two. We'll start with tax increment financing. Now remember, there's three factors when we calculate property taxes. That's a value determined by an appraisal from the assessor. And I'll give you copies of the slides afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Great. I've got a copy here that you can just take and copy off. But three factors when we calculate taxes: the value is determined by an appraisal done by the assessor. I think they're supposed to come through something like every 3 years and visually inspect the property and make a determination as far as value. There's property class or type, and that's set by the legislature, and that establishes a rate based on the type of property. And then we have a taxation rate, which is determined by the levies that local governments make, the city, county, and school district. Well, it's the state of Minnesota now. About 4 years on the appraisal, not 3. It's supposed to reflect the actual market value within plus or minus 10%. Sometimes you'll see your valuation change significantly if the assessor's been behind or ahead of the market. The state actually monitors their sales ratio, it's called, meaning how they're assessing property versus how it's compared to the actual sales value. So if their sales values aren't lining up with the assessments that they have on the books, the state will require them to change, by a percentage all the properties within a specific class. And so that's monitored by the state. One of the important things to remember is I see developers come in all the time and say, I have this project I'm going to build, it's going to cost $10 million. The taxes on $10 million are X number of dollars. It's rare that the cost actually translates directly to market value. Typically, the cost of development is above the actual appraised value that'll be established once the project's in place. Lots of soft costs in a project that don't translate directly to market value, so it doesn't turn into a property tax. And so every time we do an estimate, and I do estimates all the time, I did one half hour before I came to this meeting, a TIF projection saying this is how much tax increment this project will generate. We always talk to the assessor because the assessor is making an important determination with regard to what a property is going to generate through that appraisal. So that appraisal is a pretty important part of the process. The property class rates, I think the only reason we include this slide is because not everybody understands that commercial industrial property have a base tax that's nearly double residential property, which is why we tend to like to have commercial industrial properties around, because they pay nearly double the tax and that a single-family residential home does. And in general, they consume fewer services. There's been lots of studies on the cost, governmental cost of serving types of properties, and commercial industrial, particularly warehousing, consumes very few local government services, but they pay relatively high property taxes. So if we were in it exclusively for the money, we'd develop a city that's all warehouses and no people, and we'd have a few come into town every day to work in the warehouse and go away at night, and we'd collect a lot of money and things would be good. But that's not how it functions. But it is a reason why in economic development we try to recruit commercial industrial businesses because they do pay higher property taxes that contribute to the system, not in addition to the jobs and all the other good stuff that they do. But it's important to understand that apartments, non-subsidized, pay about 25% more in property tax than a single-family residential home. What we don't account for on here as well is commercial industrial property and seasonal recreational property, so cabins, also pay a state property tax that was established quite a while ago, probably around 2002 or something like that. It essentially took over a significant portion of the school levy and put that burden on commercial industrial properties. So they pay an extra tax to the state of Minnesota on their property tax bill that we don't pay on single-family homes or apartments. So it's good to understand that's part of the system too when people are complaining about the property taxes. So TIF is a financing tool. What it does is it captures and redirects new property taxes. New property taxes is the key word, that are paid by new private developments. And we have this statement in here that says to promote the development which would not occur but for the assistance. In state statute for TIF, for tax increment financing, it says every project has to pass a but-for test, meaning that without TIF assistance it wouldn't proceed, period. And so how you interpret that statute gets pretty convoluted on occasion. I'll see consultants that are paid tens of thousands of dollars to run through a study on whether this development really needs the assistance or not. And I'll see other cities say, well, you know, they wouldn't be here unless they needed it, and go through all this process and pay this expense. And so, you know, in general, we're willing to work with them to try to implement something. As you get into greater Minnesota, where the cost of construction doesn't translate into value, meaning it costs me $500,000 to build a commercial structure that will be worth $300,000 when I'm done, it's easy to demonstrate that TIF assistance is needed to convince somebody to make that kind of investment, because they're certainly not getting it on the resale value of the building that they're building. As we're closer to the metro area, that value gap doesn't exist. You know, we can build something, if the economy stays pretty decent, we could turn around and sell it perhaps for more money and it appreciates. But we get much farther past Montrose, that doesn't necessarily translate, so it's not always the case. So TIF is a financing program that uses new property taxes from new private development. It should only be used to move a good project forward when it's absolutely necessary. Just as an example, we have an existing vacant gas station worth $25,000. It's currently paying $1,000 in property taxes. We tear it down, we first create a TIF district, we tear it down, and we redevelop it as a strip mall that the assessor says is worth $525,000. That pays $11,000 in tax. The increase of $10,000 from $1,000 to $11,000 is the tax increment. So that's that incremental increase in property tax that we're looking to capture. So before the project, we had $450 that went to the city, $450 that went to the county, $100 that went to the school for that $1,000 in tax we used to collect. Once we built the strip mall, we've got tax increments of $10,000, so that incremental increase in property taxes paid to the city, county, and school district that are now captured. But that existing tax that was implemented or in place on that base value still continues to go to each of the three entities. So nobody goes backwards when we create a TIF district. We're not capturing any of the value that was there before the development. We're only capturing new value that was created as a result of the development and capturing that incremental increase in property tax. So was it a good TIF if the project would not have otherwise happened without TIF? Well, good reason to maybe do it, because we're creating tax base and maybe some job opportunities. All taxing jurisdictions receive the same property tax, only the increases become tax increments, so they're not going backwards in tax base during this process. They're at least staying the same until the TIF district expires, and then they benefit from the new property tax. And the development pays normal taxes just like everyone else. TIF just redirects those taxes. So the developer that built the strip mall is paying a tax bill based on that $525,000 in value. He's paying that $11,000 tax bill. It's just that that's being redirected through the system, and you might be getting reimbursed some of that property tax, or the city may have used that tax increment to install infrastructure to serve as property, put in water, sewer, street. Might have helped with land acquisition costs. You know, there's a lot of things. We've created a revenue stream, we're capturing it, and now we're able to do some stuff with it to promote development. So, go ahead.
So, does that only apply to like an existing commercial property? What if you're annexing into the city or it's a zoning change?
Yep. We can do it on vacant land, and we can do it on property with substandard buildings, and we can do it on vacant land for small commercial projects, for housing projects. We can do it on, we'll get into it a little bit as we detail each of the types of districts. So tax abatement does not reduce property taxes, liability, or payments. Again, developers paying the full burden of what they're required to pay based on the value that they've created. It's a mechanism for rebating, reimbursing, paying for costs associated with the project. So this tool's been around for a long time, since the mid-70s. It's just a formalized approach, you know, created by statute that we can implement. The differences that we get between TIF and tax abatement are going to start to become apparent as we move forward. With tax abatement, well, let me just finish up on TIF. With TIF, the city of Montrose chooses to create a tax increment district. We send a letter to the county and the school district saying, we're creating a tax increment district. We're going to hold the hearing on July 27th. You're invited to attend and comment. By the way, here's a copy of the TIF plan 30 days in advance of the hearing, so you can see what we're up to. Talks about the project we're proposing to do, the amount of taxes we intend to capture, the duration, all those kinds of things. 99.9% of the time, nobody shows up from the county or school district. And that's okay. But ultimately, following the hearing, the city has the ability to create that tax increment district. There is no veto power by either the school district or the county. The city can create the district, capture their new incremental increase in property tax, and redirect those taxes, which was a cause of concern for counties for quite a while. So much so that the TIF legislation went from about this thick to about this thick with regard to how we can spend the money, the process for creating a district, all those kinds of things. And so there's annual reporting requirements to the state of Minnesota on a tax increment financing district. Those reports cost money to prepare. They're not necessarily easy to prepare. You're monitored closely by the Office of the State Auditor with regard to tax increment financing. So lots of stuff has happened as a result of our ability to create this financing tool without veto power by the county or school district.
So who within the city would do those reports?
I get hired to do them for some of my client communities. The auditors for the city often do those reports. Sometimes city staff, but not very often.
Okay, thank you.
They're complicated enough and they're specialized enough where it's no fun to try to learn on your own.
Okay.
So when you have these, what's the average length of time, and then after that period of time, does it increases by a set percentage then for X number of years then until it gets to the?
Generally, what you're capturing is the increase based on the market value that can fluctuate. The tax rate is actually frozen though, the year we certify the district. So even if the tax rates go up, that becomes excess increment, it's called, and is redistributed to the county, city, and school district. It's only the incremental increase in market value and the current year's tax rate or the original certified rate, whichever is lower. I'm confusing you now, but ultimately increment doesn't fluctuate a ton unless there's additional value created. And
So the value stays the same and everything else stays the same. They'll have to be taxed the same amount forever.
well, they'll be taxed based on what the appraiser says their market value is, which can fluctuate, it can go down if it depreciates. They'll be taxed on if tax rates go up. Remember, the developer pays taxes the same way as everybody else does, the property owner does. It's just that portion that gets redirected, and the only portion that gets redirected or comes back to the city or can be reimbursed to the developer is based on that frozen tax rate and whatever the market value is in that given year. And those tend to stay fairly steady. I do a lot of TIF reports and I don't see any huge massive jumps in revenue collections usually unless somebody builds something else. So 3 types of districts, housing, 3 main types, I should say. I've never used any other than these 3. There's housing tax increment districts that can fund rental or owner-occupied housing for up to 26 years. That's the maximum duration. Those housing projects have to meet income restrictions. Those income restrictions for owner-occupied are somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 a year for 2 or fewer in family size, and about $105,000 for 3 or more. That changes annually. For rental units, it's 20% of the units have to be at 50% of area median income by family size. And if you're ever interested in seeing that, I can send you that data, but that is certified annually. Owner-occupied housing is just the first occupant. Rental housing, it's for the life of the district, the developer has to certify at least annually. So,
I have a question about that. So when we met, I think you were in that meeting, Tom, when we met with,
The developers for out here.
yeah, were you in that meeting too?
yeah, I was there.
And they talked, yeah, you were there, and they talked about just doing it for like an apartment building, so is it conducive to establish, because then they were gonna do other housing, but they talked about doing it on a rent-based apartment, so is it conducive to do a TIF district then, or something like that?
Most larger rental projects are requiring TIF assistance to move forward outside of the urban core. And it's because of the cost of construction versus what you can charge for rent right now.
Okay.
Annandale subsidized, with TIF, their recent project. Glencoe subsidized theirs recently with TIF. The sewer's looking at 2 projects they're subsidizing with TIF. If you get into Eden Prairie, the only thing they're going to subsidize is something that is for low or very low income people. They're not going to have to subsidize their market rate stuff. For most other folks, as we expand out beyond that rate where rents start to drop and what we can charge for rent, most of those rental projects are asking for TIF assistance in order to proceed.
I'm sure those other people in Annandale and stuff didn't get property at a market basement price like these kids are getting. We're
No,
looking at 32,000 or something.
true.
It's up to 60.
It's up to 60.
It's up to 60
Yeah.
because of the expenses for Paxmar and then they pulled, so
Okay.
it's up to 60.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
Are they not, so you said they pulled out, they're not interested anymore then?
No, Paxmar is the one that
Oh.
originally was, this is Bremer.
Yeah, the Brummer Group. They're still trying to work that out.
So, other kinds of TIF districts, we can create an economic development TIF district on vacant land and capture increments for 9 years. It can go for manufacturing, warehousing, or distribution. It can be used for, in communities of less than 5,000, more than 10 miles from a community of 10,000 in population. It can be used for commercial projects that are under 15,000 square feet in size.
And only the second Tuesday of the month, right?
And it's as the crow flies on the weekends.
My head starts to spin a little bit.
So, do you have a,
Before the 4th of July.
yeah, do you have a city of 10,000 closer than 10 miles as the crow flies?
Yeah.
Demo.
Are they more than 10,000?
No, but Buffalo is.
Buffalo is, yeah. And you're,
Delamo's Probably, but they're getting close, but I bet they're only about 75.
Yeah, I
And
think there is.
You're closer than 10 miles as the crow flies to Buffalo.
It's a 9-mile drive to Walmart.
So you can't use TIF on vacant land for commercial projects because you don't need that small city exemption. You can use it.
Any part of the city, so I mean, it's like the farthest reaching,
Correct. If you have a corporate limit that's within 10 miles as the crow flies of a city of 10,000 or more in population, you can't do commercial TIF. You can do commercial TIF, but you can do commercial TIF if you have a substandard building on the property, which is the third kind of TIF district. It's called a redevelopment TIF district. So if we have a property that's got a building on it that we can find to be substandard. You know,
like some old
substandard,
crappy barn that's falling
Nope.
over.
no, substandard definition is easier to meet. It's the cost of bringing it up to current building code has to exceed 15% of the replacement cost of the building.
So it could be the restaurant in town that's
Yes.
empty.
Yes,
Okay.
it's possible. But for TIF to work, remember that the next project that comes in has to create significant incremental increase in value for us to capture anything. So that would have to be significantly remodeled or expanded in order for TIF to work.
It has to increase the value.
Yes, because we're only capturing that incremental increase, so.
That's where EDA comes in and negotiating, what we can do locally or city.
Okay.
Terms of all the,
So, but let's talk a little bit about the sister tool, tax abatement. So tax abatement is a formalized approach to what we used to call local option TIF, which was, Mr. Developer, we're just gonna reimburse the property tax that you pay to the city. And we're gonna have some form of contract for doing it. Well, it got codified in the state statute, providing a few regulations on how we can do that. So a tax abatement, rather than me setting a public hearing and inviting the school district and the county to come and say something if they care to, but ultimately they're part of the deal regardless. Tax abatement, each jurisdiction acts on its own levy. So if I want an abatement, a capture of, or reimbursement of city, county, and school tax, each of those entities has to meet, hold a hearing, and agree through a resolution to provide that reimbursement. Wright County's gonna drop kick you out the door in about 5 seconds. School district probably will too, because school districts don't typically participate in abatements. And so it's predominantly a city tool, unless we get into farther reaches of greater Minnesota with smaller counties where the counties have become active participants in tax abatement. I haven't seen an active participation by Wright County in tax abatement. I could be wrong, but I work for a number of communities in the county and I haven't heard that they've changed their mind on that yet. So we won't say that that's necessarily a great deal, but ultimately you can, on an existing building, agree to rebate the city portion of property tax if you're meeting some specific tests. And so on the restaurant, could you tell a new operator owner that we're going to reimburse the city property tax for X number of years in order to help them get started? You can do that, but only the city portion. County and the school district have a say over their own portion. Generally, we don't see people do that, just to be clear, because nobody really wants to go backward on the amount of tax base they have. They're usually wanting to see some incremental increase or somebody doing something that deserves that reimbursement. So it has been done. I don't see it being done frequently is what I'm getting at, just so you understand that. I'm not saying that this is rebating taxes on an existing building is something that happens all the time, because it isn't. It happens once in a while on something that the community decides is really important and they want to help a good operator get started. So
those are usually a lot shorter term too, aren't they?
abatements can go as long as 20 years, but yes, most of those deals are shorter. 9 years is a fairly common term because that matches an economic development TIF district. So, we won't talk about tax reform too much. There's nothing really new there. So who can do abatements, as I mentioned, cities, counties, townships, schools. EDAs, HRAs, port authorities, or the state can't do it directly, but you can certainly advocate to the city council that they should do it as far as participating in the project. What are the public purpose requirements? You must find the benefits of the abatement exceed the costs. It's pretty broad. We have fun with that all the time. This is where interpretation of statute gets most interesting in the use of abatement. But you must find that it'll increase or preserve tax base, provide employment opportunities, provide or construct public facilities or infrastructure, redevelop or renew blighted areas, provide access to services. You know, about anybody that's doing anything is going to create a service of some sort, so it provides access to services. So abatement law is very broad, no annual reporting requirement. Process to put it in place is far less expensive than creating a TIF district. It requires a resolution, 10 days public, a public hearing with 10 days public, or 11 days published notice, sorry. 11 days published notice, and you're on your way. Depending on the amount, we might fall into business subsidy law, where we have to have a business subsidy agreement or a financial assistance agreement. I would advise that anytime you're providing some form of subsidy, there should be an agreement to make sure both parties are doing what they say they're supposed to do. Term of the abatement, 15 years. I told you 20. You can go to 20 if the county or school district tells you they're not going to participate, which is easy for them. You know, call the county auditor, say, can you send me a letter that you're not going to participate in this abatement? Oh yeah, I can do that. That's a pretty easy letter to get. So that's why 20 years is the max. If you don't want to go out and get the letter, 15 years is the maximum duration. So any parcel's tax can be abated. You know, that's where we get into that existing value. Remember, tax increment, it's only that incremental increase. We have to have an increase in value for us to do something. With abatement, you can actually abate that existing value. It's seldom done though. Usually even on the abatements I work on, which are quite a few, we're usually focused on that incremental increase in market value because somebody's doing something and we want to promote that.
So that 20 years probably gets used quite a lot then, because school districts and counties will say, yeah, we're not doing that, and then.
Where it gets used a lot is in public infrastructure. For example, I have done 2 projects this year in Sandstone and White Lakes where they're reconstructing streets, and they didn't want to specially assess, and they used their abatement authority to do a 20-year tax abatement levy to pay for the street portion of the project costs as they're reconstructing streets and utilities.
So there's something to think about.
They chose, I'd be
What's
careful.
the English version of that?
The English version is they didn't want to use special assessments, and so this law lets you implement a tax levy.
Over the period of 20 years, basically.
Up to 20 years, yeah. So you don't have to have, statute tells the city how we can borrow money. Conventional law was you have to assess 20% of the project cost in order to be able to issue improvement bonds, the type of bonds that fund street reconstruction. Cities typically hate this special assessment process, and so some have avoided it by using their abatement authority. What you have to be careful on is this issue. The total abatements are limited to $200,000 per political year, or per calendar year in a political subdivision, or 10% of its next tax capacity, whichever is greater. It's probably this $200,000 limit in Montrose because your net tax capacity probably doesn't exceed that amount, or 10% of your net tax capacity probably doesn't exceed that amount. And so you have a $200,000 limit on what you can abate. which is a lot. But when you get into street utility reconstruction, and if you're taking it on in a large way, you could use up that capacity and then be out of the street reconstruction business unless you decide to then implement special assessments. And if you do it at that time, those people are going to say, well, nobody else paid special assessments, and so why are you doing it? It's the only issue you got to be cautious of is, do you have sufficient capacity to get through all the projects you want to do? So it takes some project planning to implement that abatement levy, because you have to understand that you can accomplish just about everything you need to accomplish. Otherwise, if you run out of capacity, you got a problem.
So once you use it, you're pretty much going to have to always use it.
Yeah. Because nobody's going to see an element of fairness in later implementing a special assessment. Because nobody else had to pay one, and so why should I?
Well, we already have that happening.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking the questions, I want to avoid that.
Yeah. But, so, remember we said, what did we say? We said abatement can be used for public facilities or infrastructure. So, in those instances, we're abating property taxes to do street reconstruction. So $200,000 is the magic number. That's the principal amount on the bonds that are issued. It's the amount, and that's a calendar year number. So your abatement levy in any given year can't be more than $200,000. Out of the gate, it seems like a lot, but I have had communities run through that capacity. Not many, but some. So. How's abatement affected by levy limits? We haven't had them for a while, but generally they've always been defined as special levies that are outside of levy limits, so levy limits haven't applied to abatement levies. How can they be used or spent? So if we create this revenue stream by adopting an abatement resolution, we can reimburse developers for private development expenses. Usually land acquisition, utility connections, things like that. We can help pay for the public infrastructure. We can run water, sewer, those kinds of things. I've done storm sewer projects for large industrial developments. Improvements do not have to be adjacent to the abatement parcel, but they must benefit the parcel. TIF districts are odd. We have to create these boundaries, and everything we spend money on has to occur within those boundaries. With abatement, that's not the case. As long as we can demonstrate some benefit, I mean, you could build a water tower over here that benefits an industrial property over here, and we could abate taxes off that industrial property to build the water tower as long as we could demonstrate that fire flow was enhanced for that business, those kinds of things, water pressure, whatever. So no boundaries like in TIF. In both TIF and abatement, where folks have gotten into trouble, it's been quite a while, but where folks got into some trouble was whenever you create a revenue stream, you can borrow against it. And so, let's say we have a developer that's building a building, on the west end of town. We're going to put in streets and utilities to serve that area. We're going to issue a bond as a city to do that, and we're going to capture their increments and pay for that bond issue. Well, if market values go down, if tax rates go down, our revenue stream all of a sudden declines. And that's happened. Everybody says, people say that taxes never go down, but that's not true. They have on occasion. Usually it's the market value reduction, in hard times when houses decline in value and those sorts of things, or the state changes the property tax system, which has happened in our history. They've decided, well, we're going to put more of the burden on commercial industrial property than on residential property. All of a sudden, our TIF districts aren't performing like they once did. We've issued bonds, and now we're having to do a supplemental levy to make those bond payments, and our taxpayers are unhappy because we made a pledge to pay off those bonds from tax increments and our tax levy if needed. All of a sudden, we're needing to make a tax levy. So that's not without risk when we fund things up front. And that's probably the most interesting part of the whole discussion when you get deep into it.
I don't see the state ever changing their property tax scenario?
They did it in 2001 in a big way, and
Did they?
cities like Chanhassen got caught. They had a lot of TIF bonds outstanding. That was when they moved the school levy over to commercial industrial property, and essentially almost a third of the levy all of a sudden wasn't captured as tax increment, because you can't capture that state tax levy on commercial industrial property. We don't get that in the TIF district. That's exempt from it. And so it's been 19 years, but I'll not say never.
It's a pretty complicated system.
We had Governor Ventura at the time, so it was an interesting governor that did that, but, so bonding authority, no referendums required. We don't count against our statutory debt limit, which is the only real limit we have in place, and that's only on pure tax-supported debt. With abatements, the principal can equal the sum of the abatements. We can use other sources for the interest payments. Once issued, we can levy whatever we need to make the payments. Statute authorizes us to do that. And where two jurisdictions are providing the abatements, that can be sized to do both. We have seen that on occasion where counties have participated. So, can abatement work with TIF? Not directly. We can authorize an abatement to occur following the end of the life of a TIF district. I don't see this happen much at all, so I wouldn't worry about this one either. We're typically not subsidizing for that kind of a term where we do a full term of a TIF district and then do abatement after. We just shouldn't have to subsidize projects that long, So legal requirements. Got a published hearing. This should be more than 10 to 30 days, so it's actually 11. The abatement resolution has to talk about those benefits to properties, identify the parcels involved. We have to actually identify the benefited parcels, which is an interesting conversation. Even on street reconstructions, the benefited area is almost always going to be beyond just the houses that are on the street or abut the street, because it's so expensive to do street reconstruction. We're usually abating taxes on multiple layers of folks that funnel into that street. So let's see. We think with abatement that but-for logic should still apply, especially when we're subsidizing economic development. We want to make sure we're only doing stuff that we absolutely have to do. We evaluate both options when people talk to us about projects, and we recommend the one that seems to fit the circumstance better. If there's that strong incremental increase in market value, we're going to usually recommend TIF, because we should be able to shorten the duration that we're foregoing our local property tax. The subsidy is almost always a defined amount. Say it's $100,000. If we're doing that on our own, it might take us 15 years to pay that $100,000 cost. If we have the county and the school, a little bit of the school district money coming in through a TIF district, along with our local property tax, we could probably cut that duration in half and subsidize for a shorter period of time, so that the city's not out that new tax base for as long. Make sense? We do with abatements, who does the calculation, projection, collection? This is one of the drawbacks of abatement. The city does. With TIF, we adopt this plan, we send it to the county auditor, they manipulate their tax collection system, and magically we start collecting money. It's a beautiful thing. With abatement, we have to actually make the levy as a city council every year. And the interesting part of that is, if you're, the newspaper is going to report that you increased your levy. And usually we're setting this abatement levy to offset an increase in tax base. And so what we're telling the taxpayers is even though we're levying this abatement levy, we've added this new tax base as a result of this project. So the net impact to everybody should be 0. But the newspaper will say you increased your levy by 10%. And so with TIF, you're not making that levy. It's magically in the city's or the county's tax system, and we collect it. We don't have to make the levy, and nobody's the wiser. So that's an interesting part of the project, interesting part of your truth in taxation discussion. So just the last general comparison, TIF automatically captures most local taxes, goes into the county auditor system, we get a check, everything's good. There are lots of rules and reporting in TIF. We have that annual report, we have lots of rules governing how we can spend those dollars, how we can collect them, where we can spend them, all those kinds of things. County calculates and distributes TIF, which is pretty nice. We don't have to worry about remembering that levy or calculating the amount. Long-term commitments, as long as 26 years in redevelopment and housing projects. 9 years on economic development. Can't do all projects. There are just some things that are excluded. We talked about commercial projects because we're closer than 10 miles to Buffalo here. So on a vacant piece of land, we can't use TIF to do a commercial project. We can do abatement, but we can't do TIF. We can do manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution on vacant land, but only those 3 things. Easy flexible bonding with TIF, you can actually borrow 5 times the projected revenue stream. And we can have assessment agreements. An assessment agreement is where we sign an agreement with the developer establishing a minimum market value for the project, which helps to guarantee that income stream. With tax abatement, everybody has to agree to participate that's going to participate, so county and schools speak for themselves. Few rules and no reporting. Still, each jurisdiction must calculate, budget, and levy their share. Terms limited to 15 and 20 years. It can be shorter than that, but those are the maximum durations, 15, 20 if we get the letter from somebody saying they're not going to participate. We can do most projects. There's very few restrictions. The only thing we can't do is governmental buildings. Everything, we can do public infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. We just can't do community centers and city halls. Bonding is easy but limited with abatement, and no similar authority for assessment agreements with abatement. So we can't have an agreement that says the developer is going to agree to establish that market value that's there for the duration. So pros and cons, is cooperative abatement better than TIF? Almost as powerful if we have, by cooperative abatement, I mean counties participating. That's what cooperative abatement. If the county participates, it's going to generate very nearly the same revenue stream as TIF because the school levy that we can capture in TIF is very small, mostly. It's less expensive to set up an abatement. It's probably less expensive for everyone to administer because we don't have the report. There's fewer compliance issues and there's no income limits. Where school levy remains significant, we can have revenue leakage, but it's only a portion of that school revenue system because we can never capture most of the referendum-based debt in abatement or TIF. It's only operating stuff. Coordination and cooperation can be challenging. Been to a lot of county board meetings where they just don't get it. Their mind isn't in economic development like cities' minds are. Cities closer to the folks on Main Street and in the industrial park and understand some need for working in the area of economic development. Counties don't see that as much. Does not have the same leverage as TIF. We can't borrow 5 times the revenue stream, and it's shorter duration for most projects.
We have 5-minute chance.
Yep, I'm almost
I
done.
have to let people go.
Yep. So it's go to loan abatement. It's a poor substitute for TIF. Sometimes it's the only thing we got, particularly if it's a commercial project in Montrose. Required subsidy can take twice as long. This is the point I was making earlier. If we have county and school taxes that we're capturing in a TIF district, we should be able to shorten the duration of the subsidy, which means we're foregoing our share of the property tax for a shorter period of time. Here's where we think its abatement has merit. Cooperative abatement, if we can get the county to participate. School levy is not significant. We have seen some policy agreement between counties and cities worked out where, we'll have a work group that gets together. I see Wright County's been questioning some of their communities about getting more involved in economic development and asking for representation on they're going to create an EDA, it sounds like. Or they're going through the planning process anyway. That might be an entity where you could work with them to have this policy discussion on tax abatement and where they might be willing to use cooperative tax abatement. I'm not optimistic, but it's possible. It's possible. So, we talked about some of the benefits of the new taxes, and people understand that by and large, but biggest political challenge abatement is visibility. Again, it's that TIF is off the budget because it magically appears with abatement. You have the visibility because you're making that levy. So, any questions on that stuff?
No, but you did, I have done a ton of training on this, and you did make it very easy to understand, so
I don't
thank
know
you.
about that.
Yeah. It really did. I mean, you clarified a lot of the lengthy reading I've done, and I walked away looking for a beer somewhere, so.
Yeah. There's a lot of, on the TIF side, there's a lot of stuff in the weeds. I mean, it's just a lot of stuff to have to understand and work your way through in order to know whether you can do it in a specific instance, but.
I'm thankful we have a guy like you to understand all this.
Well, that's what we do.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome, but it's good to have a general understanding of how these work. From the public's perspective, no matter what, in TIF or abatement, the property owner is paying their property taxes in the same manner as everybody else that builds the project. Now, we might be creating the TIF district or doing the abatement to give them a subsidy. We might not, but just by virtue of creating the TIF district doesn't mean we're subsidizing that particular developer. We may be using it to enhance infrastructure in a specific area, build storm sewer facilities where we can assess for it, things like that, so. All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, do we have any new business updates so we can roll this thing along?
We have some, Forest Creek is asking for a PUD on the townhomes that they want to build, and I don't know where that's going to go. We have a public hearing on that. And then,
Are those townhomes along Breckenridge?
I don't know.
What's a PUD?
Planned unit development, they're asking, they have one, but they want an amendment to it. And then, we have Joel Lemmerman contacted me about developing the Apple property, but I haven't heard back from him. And the planner says that he's still working with Brummer. The ball's in Brummer's court now. They have to get the water system set up there. And then before you take a motion to adjourn, like I said, we're going to cancel the Tuesday because Tom will be out of town in July, and I'm hoping I get my ticket back in. So I'm pretty sure I will, so I won't be in the office, so I think if that's okay, everybody will wait till August.
Yeah.
Okay? Okay.
Okay, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Never heard it once.
Maybe not here.
Just to see what happens.
Just, not here, but definitely at a council meeting, I'll just all of a sudden pull it out. Just, no.
No.